It's good to have you on, man. Buddy, old pal of mine. I really am thankful that you were able to hop on here, and I'm thankful we were able to schedule. It sounds like your season is kind of crazy right now.
Yeah, this is sort of that conference season in the spring where there's a lot of in-person events going on. A lot of people sort of trying to get their entire year in order, and
Yeah,
things cool off a little bit in the summer and then kick back into high gear in the fall.
yeah. You would think that there would be more, I guess, more conferences in the summer when the weather's nicer, but I guess that's not the case. So what are the conferences that you're dealing with right now?
Let's see. I just got back from the Parts Base Expo. That was the sort of aerospace suppliers conference. Lots of like commercial airlines, but then also like MROs, if you know what those are, people who refurbish
Hmm.
aerospace and aircraft components, and then lots of interesting conversations with people who are DoD adjacent in that space.
Yeah.
I coming up soon here. I'll be presenting at a undisclosed location at the Defense Cybercrime Center's Tech Exchange or TechX.
Wow.
So that'll be really fun. We'll be talking about common CUI categories and things like that. And then later in April, I'll be at CS5 West. We've got a really packed schedule. I'm excited to be part of a couple different presentations and panels, and then also running a CUI centric roundtable. So really excited about that.
Tell me about that roundtable. I didn't know you were doing that. What are you guys planning on doing? Is it like a workshop?
Yeah, yeah. I think the theme is no kidding CUI, like the really like staring you in the face, controlled unclassified information that
Yeah.
organizations can orient around and make decisions around. So I think we'll be talking a lot about just what is it that makes CUI identification and determinations difficult. What are some things that we can do to increase everyone's situational awareness on the most common CUI types that we are seeing out in industry,
Mm.
and then what comes next after that.
Yeah, that actually, honestly, that sounds like a really pertinent topic to address right now. It's because I mean, we're not dealing so much. I mean, we are some. I will say we are some. Even we are, and we're not really doing much services work directly with OSCs anymore, anyway. But we are still seeing a little bit of like the weird situations, the weird this weird schematic that comes out of nowhere, and it's random. It comes every 3 months. They send something to us every 3 months with this, and it's so often not marked, but they tell us to treat it. These weird situations. But yeah, I mean, what can everybody glean from? This is how you should be prepared to deal with these very very common types of CUI because everybody kind of gets it. So, yeah, that's a. I think that is going to be a really really pertinent topic. So that's cool to hear. So you've got a lot going on conference wise. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I think there's even more events that are coming up throughout the rest of this year, but I'm always just managing the event horizon of like what's directly in front of me.
Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, obviously, it's not meant to be conceited or anything, but do you ever have to like turn down engagements just because of how busy you are?
Well, I mean, we definitely have to prioritize like speaking
Yeah.
opportunities and things like that over things that I'm personally interested in. So,
Yeah, that's a really good point. As a business owner, you get to use that language.
yeah,
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 that's really
absolutely.
cool.
So there's an element of that, and then sometimes there's just scheduling conflicts, right? You have
Yeah,
things happening the same week as each other, or within just a few days of each other, where you don't have enough turnaround time on the travel side, on the business side, on the home front. So it's a little bit of triage here and there.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess I should ask. Of the big ones coming up that you know of, what if you're talking to an OSC or an MSP that's trying to work in this space, what would you recommend to be like the one to prioritize the most? Probably, obviously, not that aerospace one or something like. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but what are the conferences that you would say, hey, if you're really trying to get some good sessions in around this space and you're trying to learn or trying to grow here, which ones would you say to go to?
Yeah, I would say that if you are a defense contractor doing your own implementations, not all conferences are necessarily going to address your needs as richly and deeply as others. And so, like,
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of like nearby regional events that seem to either like have a presence from someone at DoD, or like a local contracting acquisition command or a big prime or something like that, where there's a very clear indicator that like, parties involved in your actual supply chain or in your customer base are going to be there, driving conversation. So,
Mm.
coming up, there was just a great event that I heard about in the Northeast area, so like a New England area, summit that just took place at one of the local colleges. And I apologize because it's like, it's like this bingo card of like the names of the conferences. Like it's like
Yeah.
something summit, something
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. The
Like
National Cyber Summit or the
yeah, it's
Cybersecurity National Summit, like
yeah,
whatever,
it's like
whatever it is.
region area CMMC other word 2026.
Yeah, they've got to sound relevant. They've got to sound relevant because that's how they're going to get attendees. They got to sound, a summit sounds relevant, baby.
Yeah, but I mean, there was an event at SMU down in the Dallas area, I think this week, and then this fall coming up, I know there's a Pacific Northwest event that our team is hoping to make it to. So yeah, like those regional events always feel like they have
A lot of
more,
value.
like more people who are actually invested in that economic region involved and having discussions. And then, of course, obviously, like CS5, if you can make it to one of those a year, it's probably just the single most consolidated group of CMMC implementers, practitioners,
Yeah,
C3PAOs, all of that stuff all in one place. So even if it's skewed a little bit more towards the quote unquote ecosystem and the service providers, or at least more represented or attended by those parties, I still have awesome conversations there with like actual defense contractors really rolling up their sleeves and doing the work.
yeah. I mean, we've gotten a lot of really great conversations and leads and things like that from, we have a big focus on MSPs too, but also just from direct contractors coming to these events and they're like, oh man, this is the best place to have like a marketplace of everybody that I can talk to all in one place. So yeah, I agree. I think CS5, and it's really interesting to talk about, I guess events that people from the supply chain and the economic influence related to this industry you're working in and the governance regulations that you're dealing with all in one little local place. I think that's really good advice because like I think I don't know, did you see that Stacey Bosjanik or not Stacey Bosjanik, but Katie Arrington spoke at a recent conference as something, it was something similar to that.
I think it might have been that Northeast summit that we were mentioning.
That you mentioned. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
So I
wasn't
mean
there,
things
but
like that have to be so valuable, right? They have to be so valuable and perspective driven. Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
and sometimes from a perspective side of things, like I like going to conferences that have no stated CMMC angle,
Mm,
but like a major NDIA event, for example, or maybe something on like the NCMS side or
yeah.
whatever it might be. If you go to cyber conferences, CMMC is barging into the door and becoming part of those conversations.
Yeah.
If you go to any defense industrial based conference, it's starting to crop up there because it is becoming the existential risk that we thought it might become. So,
Mm,
I'll be hoping to go to like, for me in Michigan, the MDEX conference, which is like the big Michigan Defense Expo. That's a huge event put on by the National Defense Industry Association in my backyard, and I like to
yeah.
just go and hear what people are talking about, hear what contractors' biggest areas of concern are, just kind of see what the vibe is, and
Yeah. What the vibe is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that can
it's
be
good.
helpful.
That's how you stay on top of things. I feel like you can read a lot, but if you're not in the trenches talking to people, you're gonna miss a lot. I think so. That I'm gonna miss going to conferences for the next couple of months. With the pregnancy and everything. My wife is pregnant, but um, I, you know, I love conferences. I love going to them. I feel like the best learning moments for me come from conferences second only to mistakes made in actual work, like actual hands dirty work. So yeah, I love going to those. So that's really good. Um, I guess I wanted to give people an opportunity to get to know you a little bit before we kind of dive into some of the stuff I wanted to ask you about. You're really well known in this industry and especially on like the CUI, the Discord. So I mean, people have probably seen you here and there, and I feel one of my major purposes and goals with this podcast is to help people get to know the person behind the talking head, kind of like I said when we were getting ready to start recording. And I hope people, this helps bolster trust, because people need to feel comfortable reaching out for help. That's one thing that I think we all have seen is if we can keep people encouraged to get help, because a lot of the time they're not experts in cyber regulations, they're small mom and pop shops or whatever the case may be, trying to just put bread on the table. If they can get help and not feel like that you're kind of unreachable or other than, I feel like a lot more people will be aided in getting this done. So I feel like that's a big part of my goal, my heart for this podcast. So if you would be comfortable with it, I'd love to kind of go back to how you grew up, where you grew up, the things in your personal life that kind of made you into the man that you are today, helping the people that you do today. So anything that you're willing to share, as much and as long as you want to go, I'd love to just go back as far as you can.
Sure. Yeah. So for me personally, I was born in Southeast Michigan in the Metro Detroit area. I grew up there my whole life. I still live in the area. I have had great opportunities to travel and go work other places and things like that, but something always brings me back to my stomping grounds.
Back to me.
Yeah, exactly. So, for me, I grew up in that area in a very like working class, semi-rural context, graduated from a pretty small high school, and joined the Marine Corps when I was 19. Did a lot of things after that to just really try to learn and continue to feed that desire to learn new things. So like one of the things that was always part of my life in my teens and my 20s was like always having like some sort of second job where you could learn something new. You have the job that pays the bills, and that's great. It's consistent. You can kind of do it consistently. But then also having some small part-time gig that lets you sort of branch out, learn something new. That was actually my first experience in manufacturing. I worked a part-time job doing quality inspections at an automotive supplier factory floor, and
That's awesome.
just learning like how to spot burrs on machined elements and tag things for rework and sign off on inspections and do all of that stuff, and just kind of got me some exposure to that world, and that really helped me out, I think, later on. I transitioned into the world of IT sort of as a graduated set of steps, like working in telecommunications, then working in managed IT for an MSP. And when I was actually working for a managed IT provider, I was approached by our local state economic development corporation about this new effort that the state was going through our NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership Office. And that initiative was really to explain what this new thing called NIST 800-171 was. And so working with the NIST MEP office, I started to be part of educational events and things like that. And, going back to like things that'll happen to you in your life that then maybe serve you well later. I was always, battling kind of that imposter syndrome throughout,
Same.
Different stages in my career, because, if you come in without a lot of like the traditional degrees and certifications or whatever, and you're working a new job, you're always wondering if you can hack it, if you can make it, if you'll ever be good enough, things like that. And so my response to that was always to be a good student of the subject material and like really uh, work hard on outreading the other guy.
Hmm.
So, sort of a fantastic matchup for me was getting into the world of NIST special publications and cybersecurity documentation. It's all about your ability to, read and synthesize and sort of integrate things that you're learning from a lot of these standards-based documents. And so, early on, this was like in 2016, heading into 2017, even when, the DFARS clauses that we talk a lot about weren't even
Yeah.
fully baked yet. We were going through uh, the process with these NIST MEP programs of figuring out how do you explain these requirements that are written in sort of like this strange NIST dialect. If you've ever read these documents, they're not plain language in the way that you would sometimes want them to be.
Yeah.
I think that in a lot of ways, NIST doesn't want to accidentally make like a vendor product recommendation, and to avoid that, they like look for like the least used way to possibly describe something.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's exactly what's going on is they want to keep everyone from looking at them and saying, "Hey, there's a lobbyist in their backyard."
Exactly. So I think that sort of like desire to stay away from any industry lingo or the way that other vendors might describe things leads to sort of like a necessary translation layer where you have to figure out, okay, the requirement says this in normal language in a normal cybersecurity program that translates to this other thing. Now that we have gotten there, we can maybe look at examples like real implementations, things like that.
Mm.
And so, uh, I'm very fortunate to have gotten a head start on that process through those MEP programs, even before it was cool or even profitable to go like start your own consulting firm and get into the CMMC space. I had about a 2.5 year head start before CMMC was even announced to
Mm.
start learning and thinking about real world implementations and find known good configurations, good ideas for policy, and then of course learning about things like CUI, so that when CMMC did start to become more relevant and more real for the broader industry, I had some ideas at least. So I'm very fortunate to have gotten that head start.
Yeah, you had context that 90% of the people who are trying to implement this in their business didn't have, which is part of the empathy, to be honest, that I have towards them, that I don't think is always shared. And sometimes there's perspectives that I haven't seen. I wrote a blog the other day about um, the you've had this requirement since 2017 mantra that's regularly provided, which again, and part of my article is that is true on a technical level. You've had the DFARS 7012 requirements in effect for 80171 since 2017. That is true, but things have changed. Perspectives have changed, interpretations have changed, and guidance has been given, and FedRAMP, moderate equivalency clarification. Like, there's a lot of things that have changed. And for somebody like you coming into the field and being there to help people who've had the context all along the way, some of these people are, we still get asked questions about how do I know if I'm going to be required to have CMMC? Like some basic things that there are some clear guidelines on now that you would think would be much more well known, and we're still getting questions about it. So it's like, I think everybody just needs to pause and I want to get to later to you about polemics in the space right now and what your thoughts are. But no, I think that that's super helpful. So you've before you started DefCert, which I want to get to DefCert in a minute. Before you started DefCert, so you came out of the military and you were working in manufacturing, working with the state with the MEP program and all these things. What was like the roles and titles that you were taking on in that time before you started DefCert?
Yeah, so before that, I was in a lot of business development roles in
Hmm.
telecommunications, and even in my time in managed IT services. When this NIST 800-171 opportunity came along, and I was participating in a lot of conversations with the MEP programs, I had always just kind of assumed that somebody else would be along shortly who would have all of the implementation ideas and the strategy and the subject matter expertise and these other things. And this really isn't like a knock on anybody else who was part of some of those programs. I met some absolutely incredible, just very skilled and talented NIST MEP employees along the way. I would say though that like for a lot of the potential service providers or the people that were maybe going to help put on events or seminars or educational opportunities, there was a lot of like organizations that were resting on their laurels. And well, I used to do government work in the world of cyber, or
Yeah.
I'm former military, therefore this is somehow self-evident for me. Just here's where you
Right. I
can
know
send a
everything.
check. Yeah,
we
and
I've heard the same thing, dude.
yeah,
It's like,
and we were showing up to a lot of these planning meetings with a lot of involved parties, and people weren't reading the documents. People
hmm.
didn't have next order questions, and we had direct access to some of the authors of the documents at NIST at that time, and nobody was, not nobody, very few people were taking advantage of that opportunity. And so, I
Hmm.
thought I was just going to be paving the way for other people that could be brought in that could do more specialized work. And so I was asking questions that I thought they might want answers to later. So
Hmm.
getting ahead of that. And it was the combination of being willing to read the source material, try to understand it, try to ask questions about how that is lived out in the real world. Pretty quickly, it became a situation where, um, I was getting tapped on the shoulder to do more of these events, to participate in more grant funded projects, things like that. And so I ended up taking on a director of compliance role, in my prior employer. So leaving the traditional, business development and sales role, and moving into that because of that head start that I had been able to
Yeah.
build for myself. And so I that was not my background, right? I was not a dyed in the wool GRC nerd, but I learned to become as much of one as I could.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe the nice combination there is that when you work in a customer facing role, I mean, I've done everything from wait tables to work in retail, and all these other things. You have to develop a sense of other people's needs. You have to have emotional intelligence. You need to be
Hmm.
able to you know perform active listening and capture what someone else is saying, and gain agreement and overcome objections and all these other things. And
Yeah.
so when I moved into that compliance role, I really started to use those skills with defense contractors, basically just trying to gain agreement on what we thought we could do to meet a set of requirements, to figure out where there were knowledge gaps and where, we didn't know what we
Yeah.
were supposed to be doing, to run that up the
Convince them
flow.
that it's requirements in the first place. Like, get them out of that this is not going to happen, or this is not going to work, or this is not real, or that doesn't mean that, and get some solace with them on like this is actually what's coming.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there were a lot of years there where if you were not in the right customer relationship with a prime, or you weren't on a particular critical program, there really wasn't a whole lot of pressure to implement these
Mm.
requirements. And so,
Yeah, there wasn't.
yeah, you were mostly working with early adopters, organizations who saw the writing on the wall, or had been through something similar before, and thought that they understood how this was going to play out and wanted to get ahead of it. Uh, you know, the grant funded projects that we did were definitely driving awareness for the people who were working on us, with these projects. And I think a lot of those organizations, I can look back now and say, wow, they definitely, were able to get a certification or become compliant in a more cost-effective manner because they weren't operating under such compressed timelines.
That's such good advice. And that is true. That is what had happened is if many people, I want to say everybody, because some people are actually new to the industry too, but if people had maybe started a little earlier and took it more seriously earlier, that is definitely true. They would have saved money. We've seen that a couple times now. But hey, that's the thing is, regulations morph the industry. They morph the competitive base, right? They unfortunately sometimes companies, we've seen this happen a couple times. I'm sure you have too. Their companies don't stay in the DIB because of the regulations, but also some go all in and they become competitive. And I've heard a couple times now from contractors saying they think things are going to get worse before they get better for the DIB. Do you feel that way too when it comes to supply chain bandwidth and people who are going to actually be ready to be awarded contracts under the phases? And what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you're going to have a lot of downsides to manage in the defense industrial base over the next few years, and it's going to be the organizations who do that effectively who end up benefiting the most. So
Yeah.
anytime you have an industry that becomes regulated in this way for the first time, and by that I mean an emerging requirement that is not an area of expertise for that industry, right? The most represented industry sectors in the DIB, manufacturing, construction, the list goes on. They are not like natively awesome at cybersecurity and and managing technical debt and all these other things.
Yeah.
So this is not explicitly a strength of the industry. And now you've got a significant regulation on that topic that also requires significant capital outlay in an industry that is already capital intensive. So these aren't OpEx organizations, right? They live and die at the purchase order level, at the contract level, and it's feast or famine. So from that perspective, anytime you've got regulation showing up in an industry like that, the end result is always consolidation. And in a lot of cases, it's mass consolidation. I personally witnessed this in healthcare back in the 2010s when you started to see electronic medical records requirements and the HIPAA security rule showing up in small doctors' offices, and medical practices where, you've got, a 5 or 6 figure outlay to meet these requirements. Most single doctor practices, would have the single practitioner say, well, I'm 58 years old. I have a boat. I have my cottage. I'm pretty much where I want to be. So I am either going to just choose to not comply, and when the Office for Civil Rights does find me, I will close my doors, or they'll sell to a PHO.
Sell their book of business, yeah.
So if you look around in your local hometown, you're not going to see a lot of small doctors' offices anymore, and the result of that regulatory push was consolidation.
Yeah, you're going to see them lumped into larger conglomerate, right? Like we have, where I live, we don't have a lot of small. Actually, I can't think of a single small, like primarily doctor owned facility. They're all part of something like a Pratt Healthcare. That it's like there's small offices, but they're all under that umbrella of Pratt or, Mary Washington Healthcare, whatever it is in here in Virginia. So yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And so you're saying that, do you think consolidation is coming for much of the DIB?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the fact that the 8A program is seemingly weakening before our very eyes, and some of the things that could potentially be too big of a capital outlay for some of these organizations who have relatively low margins. I think you're going to end up with organizations who don't even know why the customer stopped calling. And one of those reasons could be that they're not CMMC certified and they've been very quietly taken off some vendor lists. And
Hmm.
so they're going to hit this period of time where revenues drop sharply, almost inexplicably, and they're going to starve to death. And that is usually when somebody either who is themselves certified and has been looking for capacity, or just a third party, private equity or someone looking to do roll ups will come along and they'll get an awesome deal on that
Yeah.
company because they're not able to keep the lights on. And so I do
And
think
that's
that's going to
that's
be.
all in the midst of the DOGE stuff, and that's all in the midst of the continued efficiency efforts, which I don't know if that's reversing much. I don't know if you saw that they're rehiring a ton of people now, but but still, like the turmoil at the contract level, which we still see today, from even our our parent company, talking about how they've talked about how contracting has changed, and the types of orders that are received and the types of work orders, and it's just it's not the same DoD or federal government that it was 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah, and it's this constant reformulation, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got uh, big players getting broken up and the work being handed out to smaller participants because they suspect waste, fraud, and abuse from some of those larger monolithic players who maybe weren't doing as good of a job.
Mm.
So in those opportunities, like smaller players could come in and potentially grow a lot. But then on the other side, you've got organizations who just can't hit escape velocity because some of these regulatory requirements are just too onerous for an organization of their size.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this kind of death valley where, ironically, it's way easier to get CMMC certified as a brand new company
Yes.
with no
Yes.
technical debt, with no organizational debt, because they're not working through their backlog of old busted technology
Yes.
or business
They can
processes.
start fresh.
And then you get to the other end of the spectrum, and organizations are just big enough that they can not blank check the situation, but they can make it happen. Even if they're going to get certified in a limited scope, they can make it happen.
Yep.
And it's those organizations that are in the middle ground there, where they're not big enough to be able to just throw money at the problem, but they still have enough accumulated critical mass, and they're an object in motion that meeting these requirements are going to be difficult for them.
What do you think? What do you think? I know we haven't even gotten into some of the first topics I wanted to ask you about, but this is super interesting to me. What do you think about the the idea that as these phases come in, and you've already alluded to consolidation being a likelihood in this industry, what do you think about the well, first off, do you think that there are going to be enough contractors dropping out of the supply chain for the government, at least for the DoD? Let's just stick with the DoD, to where there will be any waivers. Because and the reason why I ask this is it is not. Obviously, I wish I could say names because it would make me seem more credible. But it has not only been said once to me that there have been generals and let's just say higher up DoD officials that have skirted around very specific regulatory requirements because they want their jet or they want their Humvee or they want this thing. Now, that language was something that I heard, more than a year ago, but I don't see how. I mean, we have the CMMC waiver program, and we all know that CMMC waivers are for the entire contract. They're not for individual members of the supply chain or individual requirements from NIST 801. It's that's dealt with at the CIO level. This is just widespread waivers for the whole contract. Do you see there being a little bit of a backtracking at all once the supply chain shortens up a little bit?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call it backtracking, but like the DoD guidance that you've seen already for how CMMC levels will be specified, mentions the fact that program managers should be interfacing with acquisition commands and contracting officers to even identify whether or not they have enough certified suppliers to require a specific level. That being said, we're still seeing a lot of organizations being told in no uncertain terms, like, you're going to have a certification requirement. This is not this is not something that we're going to dance around.
Right.
So I think that, like, it would be irresponsible to say that there's going to be one, like, either or decision that's going to be made. Like, either everyone's got to get certified or there's going to be waivers. Like, it's always a both and. And so, like, most organizations are going to have to pursue certification, and that's also going to be more true the closer you are to the sun, like the further up in the supply chain that you are, because you are more visible, so, like, that's a both and statement that I feel that you can comfortably make. There will probably be some mechanism by which a 3-star general can march his way into a supply chain and say, not those guys, I need the thing,
Yeah.
But, and you also have to realize that the 3-star general needs to know you even exist, and that also you make the thing that they want, and that it's critical, and that you might be the only one who can make it. How many 3-star generals do you know? So I think there's, anytime that you can think about, like, these kinds of, like, dualities that might exist in the supply chain, you can maybe ask yourself a little more intellectually honest question on, like, do you think you're going to be the edge case? Do you think you're going to be the outlier? Or do you think you're going to get swept up with most people in this type of enforcement mandate? And at the end of the day, like, how much revenue disruption can you withstand? Right? Most small businesses don't have more than 30 days of payroll in the bank.
Interesting.
So, like, how much do you want to call someone else's bluff and miss out on an entire contract cycle? Like, can you do that?
Yeah. That's let alone the fact that, these companies that might have a certain very unique situation where that particular contract is waived or something like that. That's not their only contract. A lot of the time, that's not their only contract.
Yeah, and
they're going to get the requirements one way or another, more than likely. The vast majority of them.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, like, the hot hand fallacy, if you know what I'm talking about. It's a basketball concept where, because this player made the last shot that they attempted, they must make the next one, right? They've got a hot hand. They're shooting hot tonight, whatever.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's no linkage between the chance you
There's
make
no real
the next
linkage,
shot versus the previous one. They're just not connected events. So, like, maybe you got some special treatment or a stay of execution in that last contract award event. There's no guarantee that same script is going to play out on the next one. So I think that you're largely serving at the mercy of your customer base and what their risk tolerances are and what they can shield you from or not shield you from. That's why we're so interested in whether or not OEMs, not even like the prime awardees, but like OEMs in general, can take steps on their own to protect their suppliers from level 2 requirements by controlling the way that they share data and how much of it that they share. Because we see those as the real release valves in the defense industrial base that could potentially preserve the supply chain without, for lack of a better term, over-regulating it.
And yeah, I want to ask you about that. So let's just do that. So we talked a little bit about how it's not a one size fit all scenario where smalls can think about this in the same way that larges that have all the cash in the world can think about it. So in a supply chain situation, you're dealing with both small and large businesses down the supply chain, and very unique situations, some of which their whole goal is to dedicate resources to manufacturing for, say, the DoD or for the government in general, or they have like a split income or split revenue stream where they're doing a lot of commercial work and government. They've got a lot going on. What is it that you see being, one, the most effective way to flow down or not flow down, which is what you were just kind of alluding to through like redaction and stuff like that? Like what are you seeing as the best way to handle that? Because when it comes to things like redaction, my understanding is that you got to work with the authorized holder, you've got to deal with decontrolling elements and requirements. Like what is that? Let's just start high level. What does it look like to make the supply chain flow down easier and more simple and maintainable?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that organizations need to understand when they're trying to, let's say, mitigate or limit the amount of flow downs that they need to do to their suppliers would be, you have to understand how data ownership and the intersection that it has with controlled unclassified information can have an outsized impact on your supplier relationships. So,
Yeah.
just to kind of unpack that a little bit, in 2020, the Information Security Oversight Office (ISOO), who's the office running the executive agent function of the CUI program for the federal government, clarified that when it comes to proprietary data, the information that you create internally and maintain ownership of is not CUI, even if it's still subject to laws and regulations. And that's interesting. We call that the proprietary paradox, which is this dynamic where the same file or document or piece of information may or may not be CUI based on whose hard drive it's on. And that's really a fascinating dynamic, because when we think about organizations who do maintain ownership of, let's say, technical data that they generate, you might potentially be able to flow proprietary information only to a supplier, independently of necessarily needing to include controlled unclassified information that came from your customer. And I mentioned earlier OEMs being such a critical fulcrum point in a lot of these conversations. The kinds of companies that are the best positioned to pull off that party trick are original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, who make the part. They are the design authority. It's their thing. And a government customer or a prime simply needs to acquire their thing to incorporate into something else, a larger subsystem or an entire end item or whatever it might be. So in those scenarios, there's a much clearer delineation of who owns what. The OEM who designed and produces, even outside of this particular contract, the thing that they make. If they're working with suppliers, they stand a much better chance of being able to communicate with those suppliers using only their proprietary data, which, even if it might be regulated for things like export controls, incredibly common, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's CUI due to these, you can call them ownership carve-outs or proprietary exclusions. So that's critical to understand. If you can get your head wrapped around that element, everything else is sort of like an expansion of that discussion.
Yeah, that's interesting. So can you explain to our listeners the difference between like COTS elements of that and the commercial things that these suppliers do regularly, whether they're selling to the government or to Ace Hardware down the road? What is the difference between that and the situation where you're what you're talking about with, maybe I got measurements and created this thing as part of my deliverable to a purchase order from a prime? Like, how can you help people wade through the waters of what is the thing that doesn't even need to be brought up in the conversation of proprietary versus CUI, and then kind of delve into that a little bit more, the proprietary CUI conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So, like in situations where uh, data ownership is really clearly established, that gives you this great platform to potentially share more detailed information with your suppliers and still not have it qualify as CUI because of who owns it. That's even easier to prove when it's pre-existing data sets that you've been leveraging with your suppliers for some time now. On the other side, though, you've got this inbound information, right? It's coming from a customer. And so a lot of times when we talk to defense contractors, they will say things that are sort of a swing and a miss from like their justifications for what is or is not CUI. And they'll say things like, well, what we sell is just COTS, commercial off the shelf. They're not wrong factually, right? But in a lot of cases, you must still wade through a technical data package that isn't COTS in order to correctly identify, specify, quote, sell,
What you're delivering.
and deliver a COTS item. And so
Yeah.
it's really important not to make the mistake of saying that because my thing that I sell is relatively innocuous or commercial or dual use, that I don't need to think about any of this. We've worked
It's a
with
great
organizations who sell stoves and refrigerators, right, to the Department of Defense, and it's a stove, it's a refrigerator. And
but
yeah,
the purchase order and where it's going to go and the measurements for the room and all that stuff is not.
yeah. And so in a lot of situations, they might need to possess and interact with information in order to be able to sell that completely commercial COTS item. And that's the intersection that you end up needing to manage. And so for like almost every organization we've ever worked with, you must have at least one environment in your company that is suitable for taking in customer documents and running the risk that those are CUI. So if you're looking for like a really high assurance, high probability bet on where you should start implementing NIST 800-171, even if you have unanswered questions in other areas, it's going to be wherever your initial point of receipt is for customer documents and information.
Yeah.
That will never be a wasted effort. Trust me.
100%. Couldn't agree enough. That's the very first question we ask when we do our data flow, interviews and stuff like that. So that's awesome. So I guess to dive just one more layer deeper than that. So let's hypothetically say Prime does deliver schematics or measure like a document that has measurements for, let's say a room that's going to be in a secure facility that's going to be used for, there's going to be like a break room, and so they need it for a refrigerator or a dishwasher, whatever it is. So they're delivering it, but they need a sub to be able to provide them with things that are going to fit those measurements or whatever the case is. So let's just say that document that has all those schematics and measurements is marked as CUI.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's say that as part of the workflow with the sub, they've got to take those measurements out of that CUI clearly marked. We all agree it's CUI document, but then take it and put it into this other system or this other document that helps them track or maintain. But it's just bits and pieces from that CUI document. I've had several questions now about whether or not that is going to be needs to be considered derived CUI or needs to be treated as CUI because the measurements are being pulled from an actual CUI document. What are your thoughts on that? What do you generally advise people to do?
Yeah, so anytime you're grappling with a document that you don't own, that you didn't create for the first time, that came to you from a third party, first and foremost, we don't recommend trying to edit, change, or adjust the original document. So like earlier you mentioned redaction. I think that's a failed enterprise. Like the likelihood that you're going to perfectly take everything away or off of a document that qualifies as CUI 100% of the time as like a very repeatable business process is near zero.
That's why the brands don't do it.
Yeah. And so when you do bring in a customer document, first and foremost, keep it in as few places as possible. Fix that into a storage location that ensures that you're not going to be reusing or leveraging that document in a bunch of other places as part of a bunch of other business processes that would cross contaminate your environment with that customer document. Once you've done that, now the real question is, because like there's not even a discussion on whether or not I own this document, so I can't even play my proprietary exclusions card. The only reliable card that I can play is determining whether the information that I would like to take off of this document and put into a new format is regulated by a CUI authority or not. And that's really the only alternative course of action that you have. And so when we think about a document that comes in that's marked as CUI, first of all, which CUI category, pray tell? You know, a banner marking alone is a page marking, brother. That is not a CUI marking. That is, you need a CUI designation indicator, an actual title block telling you what category of CUI you are dealing with, or categories, plural.
But it's basic. But it's basic, Ryan.
Yeah, that's not a CUI category. That's a CUI type. And so we don't want a policy nerd all over this situation, but like if you are getting documents that just say CUI as if that's some self-evident thing that will allow you to behave accordingly, and you have real use cases that require data on that document for you to do your job, you must find out what category or categories of CUI you are dealing with. And that's something that you see reflected in the language of the proposed FAR CUI rule. You need to get that clarification before you can act accordingly. But if you do get that,
the new SF form, right? It's going to be on the new special form.
Yeah.
Right.
So that particular SF form, you know, we don't know what all the content and the fields will be and things like that. But I would encourage organizations to get into the habit of doing some of their customers' homework for them. So like based on things you're seeing on the document, saying, I believe this document is controlled technical information. And, you know, just like the doctor and Catch Me If You Can, do you concur? And hopefully that will give your customer easy answers that they can provide back. They can just kind of agree with you at that point, and then you know what you're working with.
No. Yeah.
So from that perspective, like once you know the CUI category you're dealing with, then you can look at the laws and regulations that are baked into that category. And then you can actually look at a piece of information and say, is this piece of information described in those laws and regulations? You know, is this something that would require dissemination control or that would require safeguarding as described in those laws and regs? And that's going to be your course, you know, forward in a lot of these discussions. So yeah, when I do get a customer document and it says, hey, that thing that you're going to give us needs to be DO 160G, you know, rated for vibration and humidity because it's going into an aircraft. I can look at that and say, okay, do the laws and regulations for controlled technical information try to control a publicly available
standard,
published standard that I can buy from a web store regardless of who I am? The answer is no. So that is a piece of information that I can say with regulatory certainty is not the controlled technical information that I'm told is on this document. And you know, whether you apply like a reason code to that when you make the transition or whatever it might be, you know, you'll probably want to show your math on how you made that determination. But
that's
then
a good point.
At that point forward, you're effectively building a data allow list of guys. We can always take DO's dash specs off of a document. I can always take public mil specs off of a document. Here's why, here's why, here's why. And those are the ways that you get through this to where, you know, if you identify that only unregulated data is what you actually need to get quotes, to start your design envelope process, to do whatever the thing is, then you know that you've got a strategic foundation that you can really preserve your supply chain.
And okay, and then so you're implying there that if the things that are necessary to get the deliverable made, aren't the things that seem to be regulated by laws and policies and other regulations, then you're implying here that there's a good chance that the flow down of what the flow down of information that you're giving them for them to build this thing, this bolt or this part or whatever it is, isn't what is really the focus of the flow down requirements from DFARS 7012. Am I understanding you correctly?
Correct. I mean, if I was going to take a piece of technical information, the, the regulated component of something is probably going to be like the GD&T, right? The dimensions and tolerances, the actual shape of the thing, the drawing of the actual item or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you radiate outwards and you get into things like detail notes and just invoked specifications that you can literally download online, things like that, that background information is way less likely to be regulated. So, that begs the question, if I didn't need the original drawing to go make my thing, I just know that like at the end of our design process, I got to make sure that it still bolts up to their thing, or that the wiring harness comes together to start working with their thing. I can do that on, that CAD workstation, not in my PLM software. So now
Yeah.
I'm really starting to reduce scope and reduce cost.
Yeah, that's good advice. I really think that's going to be helpful. So let's talk about the inverse of that then. So let's talk about situations where you're receiving, say you're farther down, you're farther away from the sun, to use your terminology. You're farther down and you're getting documents that seem to be sensitive but aren't marked as anything. We've had this question for years, but I love picking new people's perspective on it, right? What are your thoughts about situations where either from a prime or a sub of a prime that you're farther down in the sub with, and you're getting documentation that's not marked seemingly properly? You could be wrong, but it seems like it's not marked properly. What are you saying to people?
Yeah, so like let's say for example you're getting documents that have like DoD distribution statements on them, export control warning statements, other things that make the document feel spicy by comparison to other things that you might get. In situations like those, you're probably on a long enough timeline going to start to get those similar documents with CUI markings, because the perverse incentives in the industry are to overmark, not to undermark,
Right.
in a lot of customer scenarios. And so I would treat those documents as sort of like your canary in the coal mine. And what I mean by that is if I'm getting a document that's like distribution statement D, critical technology, which we know is driven by things like the ITAR and EAR, and I've got an export control warning statement, this is a great opportunity to start building an 800-171 compliant environment for that document and those use cases. You can still apply some of the things we just finished talking about. You could start applying the laws and regulations for the appropriate categories, like things from the ITAR and EAR, to those documents now, and seeing how feasible an allow listing strategy, a data extraction strategy would work for you without necessarily investing as heavily or whatever it might be, because at least on paper, you don't have any evidence that you've been receiving CUI yet. But let's just face facts. Like, customers of yours aren't going to apply this fine-grained, granular set of logic to you as a supplier and say, yeah, we went into the stacks. We really looked at all the documents we've ever sent you, and we painstakingly reviewed all the purchase orders we've ever issued you. And we've come to the conclusion that we're not actually sending you any CUI. The reality is that you're going to get a DFARS flowdown for some level of CMMC, and they're going to say, boss said you need the CMMC. Why don't you have the CMMC? This is my problem now, which means it's your problem now. Like, we have worked with organizations who have never received a positively marked document that says it's CUI, and are aggressively pursuing certification because they know that 5 years from now, no one will even know why you need the cert, but why don't you have the cert?
It's just at that point, it's just the business competitive edge.
It's table stakes. Like on a long
Yeah.
enough timeline, it isn't even competitive edge. Now it is, right? As
Hmm.
we're riding this wave of consolidation, it's a massive competitive edge. But as more and more people have it, and as that competitive advantage is diluted across a more broadly certified, industrial base, it's just table stakes. It's just
Yeah.
the
Area
entry
of
fee,
entry.
the cover charge to be in the DIB.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So I guess the general advice would just be prepared to treat things that look that way. Well, one, don't anticipate leniency or less stringent requirements. If it feels like CUI, looks like, smells like it, has statements that might feel like CUI, it's not a bad idea to start treating it like CUI. And I think that's the general advice we're giving to a lot of people, while still seeking clarification if you can.
Yeah, and if I was to sort of like package all of that up and try to communicate that to someone, I would say, hey, you are going to need an environment capable of safeguarding CUI. So you're going to have to decide where you want to apply NIST 800-171.
Yeah.
If you are going to pick a great place to do that, it would be to apply 800-171 when appropriate to the places where you are currently handling information that is already regulated by the laws and regulations that are in the CUI registry. So that when CUI markings potentially show up, there won't be a mismatch in where you've been spending your time and efforts and
Yeah.
what the data set actually is. So from that perspective, I think there's the words like treat it as CUI sometimes get misused or conflated with it is CUI. So I prefer to like parse that into a different kind of expression and say, we are choosing to apply NIST 800-171 to positively marked CUI documents, to documents with export control warning statements, to documents with certain types of DoD distribution statements. I am not acknowledging that all of those are absolutely CUI. In fact, I
Right.
would have a very hard time establishing that for like a diverse data set like that. But what I am saying is I've chosen where to apply NIST 800-171. And I think that's the clear, like the distinction that I would like to make in a lot of those conversations, because I think that is a standalone decision that doesn't need to necessarily enroll everything as being CUI.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I feel like that there could be confusion there is not sheerly it, I would 100% agree if it was just the DFARS 7012 requirements that people were being faced with. But now, and I know CMMC, I don't want to ruffle any feathers by saying CMMC does have some new implications to it, but I do think that is the case. I mean, back in DFARS 7012 days, we didn't have the CMMC scoping guide, right? We didn't have the asset categories that we do today. So, like, the reason why I say it like that is, yes, apply NIST 800-171. I think it 100% is wise to take that approach that you're articulating. But there are some extra curricular principles that, if it's more than just DFARS 7012 being flowed down to you in your contract at that level, and you're dealing with this nuance of not knowing if it's truly CUI or not, but you're actually being told you're going to need a CMMC level 2 certification or self-assessment, whatever it is, whatever it is for the contract. There are other things than just implementing 800-171 on the system components that store, process, and transmit that thing you think it might be CUI. So I'm going to implement 800-171, or the things that provide security protections to those things. Mm-hmm. There's other nuances now. And it's like, the conversation is now expanded from just, and I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm saying the conversation is now expanded to not just, I've chosen to apply 800-171 to these system components that store, process, and transmit CUI, but there's more to consider now, especially if a certification is involved. And so I mean, what do you agree, or do you I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and there is a distinct difference between just implementing 800.171 as it's described in DFARS 7012 and the scope inside of which you're going to be assessed for a CMMC certification. You provided some examples of security protection assets, for example. Those aren't going to be necessarily handling CUI, and
Right.
so from that perspective, that is an expanded scope. I would say that as we've continued to interact with DoD on a lot of these topics, not just like myself personally, but like industry,
The industry, yeah.
the messaging is, well, you simply misunderstood DFAR 7012. When we talked about covered contractor information systems, we didn't mean a computer. We meant like the complete combination of all the assets in your environment that would be necessary to ensure data confidentiality. Sorry if you misunderstood that. And so that's the bedrock justification that CMMC is built on. So if we've got to reconcile that, yeah, if I'm choosing to implement 800.171, I'm absolutely going to have security tools and things like that as part of the overall scope that's necessary to complete the implementation. And if I'm going to pursue a CMMC certification, it's absolutely going to include more than just CUI assets. To me, though, that's an even better motivation to draw a line in the sand and say, this is where I'm installing my 800.171 practices now, rather than waiting for a more obvious need to get CMMC certified, like getting positively marked CUI. You need every day an hour that you could possibly allocate to this to get ready to be certified in time for when you're going to need it. So,
100%.
like I'm a huge advocate of starting now in the highly probable areas where CUI is going to surface and show up.
And if you have to expand, do so.
Yeah, if you focused on the areas where you've got a 90% confidence interval that that's where the CUI would show up, if it did, you're always going to be able to add things that you overlooked more easily later than the inverse, which is just like arguing about, what possibly could be different, or are you really sure that, we need to do this in those places? You need a functioning environment first and foremost that meets these requirements more unilaterally. And that's an extreme position of privilege to then be able to manage exceptions or expansions in scope.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think just let's harp on that just for a second. Anybody that's listening, if you know something is going to be storing, processing, and transmitting CUI, or has a very, very high likelihood of doing so, don't wait till you know what your security protection assets or even this vague CRMA thing is going to be, or any a lot of you manufacturers might have specialized assets, clearly understood specialized assets that you can't implement everything. It's not possible, or it's not feasible or practical. It'll break everything if you try to do something. But don't wait till you have all those questions answered. I think Ryan is exactly right. Just start doing it. Like, start implementing it on the things you know need it. So I think that's really good advice. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, okay, we're about almost 4 months into this program. Phase one, we've got about 8 months left to go. What are you thinking? How you think things are going? I don't know if you watch the town halls. I sometimes do, sometimes don't, but I think there's more to than just the town halls to kind of gauge how the environment, especially if you're in the trenches as a consultant. What are you thinking things? How are you thinking things are going?
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot more organizations show up in our inbox, with a fire lit underneath them. They are wondering, how quickly can you help us understand the scope of the effort? How quickly can we get certified? And then, working backwards from there. So it's a wide cross section of organizations who, have been working on this for a while, have not even started, all sorts of situations like that. And so I think that there's certainly like a ramp up in the need for organizations to pursue this. Seeing how many organizations are getting certified in the Cyber AV town halls is a great metric to be aware of and to track. It's not directly linked though to how many people need it.
Right.
And so I think that at least this is in my experience, the ratcheting up of enforcement in the supply chain is going to happen on a prime by prime basis, on a program by program basis. So like
Mm-hmm.
when a prime that represents the bulk of your DoD revenue sends out their strongly worded letter, or you start to have to respond to bespoke questionnaires for the first time, with weekly follow-ups or things like that,
Yeah.
that's usually what drags this to the forefront. And so you're not going to see the entire industrial base just like wake up at the same moment and have the same pressure, motivation, whatever. But even a patchwork awakening of the industry to what their needs are, will probably overwhelm the people who are trying to help implement these requirements. So, in a weird way, you almost need this to be sort of patchwork in order for everyone to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I guess that's the point of the phased rollout. But like, you made a good point that there's not a direct correlation between the numbers that the town hall is providing and like how many need it. And like, we know that because what was the DoD estimate? If you remember back in when the public inspection of the final rule came out and they gave all their their estimates and stuff like that. What was it? 160,000 small medium businesses needing CMMC level 2 certification. Is that
It was
sound about
100,000
right?
plus.
Yeah,
The reality, though, and we've talked about this at great length, is that the DoD is basing those numbers off of the entities they know about.
exactly. And also what's been surprising, I don't know if I don't know what your main focus as a DefCert is, like the types of companies. I'm sure it's probably mostly OSCs themselves, right? But we've been working with a lot of MSPs who have been going and getting their certification too. So part of that number is the types of organizations that the DoD wasn't even thinking about when they were coming up with their estimates too. So I think you're right. I think the emphasis being, guys, still strive forward, like still go, because that doesn't mean, just because there's some really great numbers on the town hall doesn't mean that everybody who needs it is getting it or is ready to get it.
Yeah, when I was doing a lot of NIST MEP grants back in the day, just for a touch point or a fact check, I would sometimes look up organizations in usaspending.gov to see like what do they do for the
Hmm.
federal government, and I was really amazed. Probably about 60% of the contractors I was working with um, weren't even in usaspending.gov, which means like they had never received a direct award, which begs the question of like, does the DoD even know they exist? And I think that in a lot of cases, the DoD sees themselves as acquiring a platform or a complete end item or solution, and it's almost dizzying how many subcontractors and suppliers it takes to pull that together.
Mm-hmm.
You do get some deduplication on the back end, where like a supplier is actually working for 3 or 4 or 5 primes. So it's not like there's this exclusive expansion of the number of suppliers.
Right.
It does chop back down a bit, but I would not be surprised if there's a 500,000 entities who are going to be impacted by this when it's
Yeah.
all said and done.
Yeah. Ozzy, I mean, Ozzy well. He was telling me one time that he worked with a prime who told them that they have upwards of, I think it was like 9 or 10,000 subs in their supply chain for one contract. For one contract. Like, how in the world do you, how in the world do you, I'm sure the DoD doesn't know about all of them, or at least isn't tracking all of them. It's a speculation, but that's a lot of subcontractors on one contract.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's good to know if you're tracking your own supply chain. How many of your suppliers would you categorize as a COTS supplier?
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who are probably the least likely to have a CMMC certification, because
Right.
they have an identity crisis, right? They see themselves as a commercial company. They don't see themselves as a defense contractor. And so if you can do things to eliminate CUI data flows to those suppliers, they're probably the ones who need the most help, and need to stay in your supply chain.
Yeah. Well, I guess as we're kind of approaching phase two, what are the things that you hope will get either clarifications from the DoD, the committees that the Cyber AV stood up for interpretation and assessment and things like that? What are some of the things that you would like to put out into the ether of things that you'd like to see addressed or resolved, or challenges that you'd like to figure a way forward? And if you have any proposed solutions, let's talk about it. I'd love to hear it.
It's as you start to think through, like, what happens after this, what happens after this, what happens after this. I think there's going to be some bottlenecks that start to emerge. If I'm being honest, I think the biggest, like, long-term issue as we go into phase two that we need to come up with a way to address as industry is how we're going to do reassessments. So
that's a good point.
In the next year, I would not be surprised if the DoD clarifies what constitutes a significant change. And I think there's going to be more significant changes than industry would like. So if that's true, and we're facing probably a lot of consolidation and things like M&A activity or expansion of an organization would trigger reassessment, the black and white version of how we do assessments today is to completely reassess all the requirements, even if the significant change didn't impact all the requirements.
Certain thing, yeah.
So I think that regardless of what the CMMC assessment process would mandate, I feel like there needs to be a way for OSAs who think they're going to be headed for, like, lots of iterative change as an industry to gain some sort of agreement with C3PAOs on how there could potentially be something like an evidence escrow, or a hash of a hash, something that would allow C3PAOs to, like, resurrect their context
Last assessment.
of what took place in the last assessment, and potentially only target down on the requirements that are new and novel. So I'd really like to see something happen there, to where organizations can get through significant changes more readily, with less disruptive assessments. I don't even know if money is the metric to judge. It's time.
What do you? That's really interesting. Honestly, I hadn't thought about the significant change things. I know that. I mean, we've thought about how do we help customers identify what is a significant change. Right now, it's an ambiguous term, so we're trying to just do care due diligence type approach, where you need to put it in a policy what you define as a significant change and stick to that. And if it happens, do the right thing and go get another assessment, kind of thing. But I think you're right. And there's been a lot of talk of it. I wouldn't be surprised if they came out with a memo or something enshrined that says if these conditions are met, it's automatically a significant change and you need a new assessment. That's interesting. I think that does increase that does expand what people are thinking about when they think about this triennial assessment that they're going to have to get. This is what's going to keep the C3POs in business, right? But it's not just those, right? It's not just triennial assessments. It's newcomers, and it's also these significant changes. So yeah, that's a really good point. I think we probably need to think longer and harder about how we are going to guide people through that process, because I don't know if there's a lot of talk about that on the industry side. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. What have you seen from knowledge sharing and the general disposition of consultants and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, even now, C3PAOs are dealing with bottlenecks and constraints as far as being able to schedule and perform assessments. So I think everybody is highly motivated to come up with more time and cost-effective ways to get through these assessments. So, when we look at that, I think that a lot of the conversations that we're seeing organizations have today are trying to solve the same problems, right? How do we do this faster, more predictably, even if it's not specifically pointed at the challenge of how significant changes can create, the need for reassessment. So whatever those initial efforts are to shorten the turnaround time before someone can get into an assessment, or to reduce the number of days that someone is in an assessment because of all of the pre-work that they've done or things like that, those will still all pay dividends, whatever ends up happening on the significant change side. This is completely wishful thinking, but it would be incredible if the DoD could move towards more like what the FedRAMP program is doing right now. They're transitioning from significant change requests to the ability to participate in significant change notifications. And so in those situations, they're allowed to, notify the correct parties when they are making a change, like swapping out tech on the back end or expanding the feature set. And in a lot of cases, just a practical discussion about what that's going to entail would help identify whether or not reassessments or approvals are necessarily needed. So there could be some ways that industry could respond in kind and just sort of match that process, but there just currently is not a mechanism to pull that off.
Almost like a larger scale security impact analysis, but not internal. It's involves the DoD, involves maybe your C3PO or a C3PO. Interesting. Yeah, hey, somebody do that. That's a good idea. I like that. Let's do that. What do you, I mean, I guess I wanted to ask you one more thing. How do you feel things are going polemically with the knowledge sharing? I know that's a total change in subject, but I definitely wanted to ask you before we run out of time. We're all super busy. We're all really heads down, and we've got a lot of the key players, great people that are helping people understand this field. Guys like you, guys like Jacob Hill and Jacob Horn, and just a lot of people in this industry that I really appreciate. Do you feel like the polemics, the knowledge sharing, maybe it's not always polemics either, but the knowledge sharing, do you feel like the information that's still being provided and the sessions and LinkedIn posts and blogs, like all this stuff, are there any trends that you are seeing as being harmful? Obviously, we can set aside the snake oil, like the obvious snake oil stuff, but is there anything that you're seeing as harmful? Anything that you see as being actually really helpful and we need to keep doing it? And the reason I'm asking is I as I am transitioning more towards just marketing and content creation and lessening my time, in the trenches doing hands-on stuff and trying to just be a knowledge sharing effort. And for our listeners who are doing the same thing, what's best for everyone? I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to knowledge sharing and moving the industry forward, there really needs to be a more open-handed approach. So be willing to share information with no strings attached, not behind a paywall, not necessarily just inside of a conference fee or things like that. Be willing to share more information than you thought you would. I think a lot of people overlook the fact that whoever is going to read your content, whoever is going to engage with you on an online platform, they're not stupid. They know when they're being gatekept. They know when you are making them feel small and uninformed. They know when they're being gaslit and talked down to or dismissed. And they know when they're being fed AI slop, all of the above. These are intelligent people, right? And so from that perspective, a lot of people that I've interacted with seem to be sharing safe bets that don't give away what they perceive as like the real blocking and tackling of how you do things or stuff like that. Um, Here's the reality: if everyone gatekeeps, it's easy to be a charlatan, right? It's easy to be
Mm,
a complete imposter and
yeah.
to actually not have the answers, and still like fit in or blend in with the general ecosystem.
Mm,
When you make a decision to share what you've been learning, what you're going through, and be more detailed in what you're talking about, you know, when we did our first couple of talks on controlled unclassified information, you know, some of my peers were like, "You're going to just present all of that and let it end up on YouTube?" And I was, you know, I don't see a problem with that. And here's why: the number of people who have reached out to us because they're like, "Hey, I saw something that you presented on like, let's say, a CUI topic." And in watching that, I immediately realized that the guy we've been paying to answer all of to be our CUI soothsayer has no clue what they're talking about.
wow.
Like, they have no idea. You downloaded more information into my brain in that discussion than I've gotten in 18 months with this supposed expert. And
Mm,
so what you're actually doing when you choose to share information in a concise way that's self-contained with all the logic laid out and no strings attached is you are actually widening the gap between the people who can effectively snow someone into thinking that they know what they're talking about and to spin some plates and to say it's all very complicated, but I
mm.
have the right credentials and identity politics A, B, and C just work with me. You're widening the gap between someone like that and somebody who knows what they're doing. So you're actually narrowing the playing field for the people who have their transmitter set to receive, or who
Right.
are frustrated with the situation they find themselves in, and you will actually um, have less artificial competition for people who can't actually do what they say they're going to do, and that's good. That's good for everybody.
Wow. It's really good advice. I hope we do that well. And that's the thing is, from a feedback perspective and from people in the industry, I hope we're doing that well. And if there is anything that could be improved upon, I'm just saying this publicly, let us know. And that goes for the listener too. If there's any questions, right? Like, I think that's great advice. And I hope that comes across as the disposition of most in the DIB. I just don't know if, I'm sure there are areas of improvement there. And I think you're right. Well, Ryan, I got to ask you, what you got coming up in your personal life, hobbies, anything you're doing for fun outside of the whole CMMC consulting space. What do you like to do?
You know, I love going outdoors, hiking. Travel is always a highlight for me, even if it sometimes is for work. One of the things that you know, one of my childhood best friends and I do a couple times a year is go into the more out of the way parts of Michigan where we both live, and we go on what we call dive bar expeditions. So
Tell me about that. What is that?
we are on the hunt for dive bars, you know, bars that are just you know, a local gem, something that is maybe a little run down, not the most commercially viable.
The best burgers.
Yeah, yeah. Anything that like feels like it's just sort of like grown into the countryside and is enjoyed by.
It belongs there.
Yeah,
It's there. It
yeah,
belongs
exactly.
there.
There's not a trace of corporate oversight or a franchise model or you know,
It's awesome.
92 craft beers on tap. Like this is a bar as uh, as most of American history has experienced it, and so
Wow.
yeah,
I love that.
that's coming up soon for me. Our
Good.
summer dive bar expedition. So looking forward to that.
How long do you go on travel for? That is like a week or two?
I'd love to have a week or two to just tour dive bars, but
Just do it. Just do it. Rent a camper and let's go, dude.
yeah, it's usually more of a long weekend.
Long weekend. Cool. That is awesome, dude. I love that. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody that does that for fun. Let's go do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to try it.
I'd recommend.
Ryan, thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it. I think this was probably one of the most informative ones specifically related to handling CUI. And I think I really do hope people will ask questions. Can you tell people how they can get up with you? Your all's website. I didn't spend much time talking about DefCert. Maybe talk about DefCert a little bit and just let's get that information out there.
Yeah, if today's conversation didn't spark anything that would maybe cause you to reach out, DefCert is a compliance consulting firm. We focus almost exclusively on CMMC. We specialize very heavily in the world of controlled unclassified information, doing CUI determination, helping organizations identify when something may or may not qualify as CUI, on all of that being done with the goal of controlling scope, controlling cost and complexity of security implementations, preserving supply chains, all of that good stuff. So yeah, you can track me down on LinkedIn. And then anytime you need to reach out to our team, you can always find us just at info@defcert.com.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, thanks again, man. This was awesome. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me.